Good morning and welcome to Daylight Church Online. We're just so thankful that you're joining us this morning and hope that you have a great experience. We want to let you know that if you'll go to mydaylightchurch.com, there's a card there that says Online Church. And on the Online Church card, it'll tell you everything you need to know about being a part of our online church community, how you can get involved in small groups, how you can give financially, how you can be involved in the service projects that we do. So even if you're in Kansas or Cambodia, you can sure join us and be a part of our church. We'd like you to check it out there and introduce yourself. So go to mydaylightchurch.com and check out the online church card. Thanks.
How's everybody doing this morning? Doing good? Excellent. If for those of you who don't know, my name's Chris Jones, and I'll be your guest speaker today. And I don't want to spend a lot of time presenting myself. I want to spend more time presenting this message. So I'm just going to jump right in because I got a lot to cover here. The picture you see up on the screen is called a tamari ball. It's from the Japanese culture, and it was gifted to me by Peggy Lyons. I spoke to Peggy and her husband, Mike Lyons, on a couple of different occasions, and they shared with me this incredible story of affliction and how encouragement and hope came out of that affliction. And it's an amazing story. And I went there to encourage and comfort them, and I actually left being encouraged and comforted. Peggy grew up in Japan, but she came back to the States, and she met and married a gentleman by the name of Mike Lyons. They had a good life together. Peggy is a school teacher, retired school teacher. Mike is a retired commercial electrician. He enjoys woodworking. They had two children, Patrick and Sean Lyons. Patrick was very confident. He was a competitive bodybuilder. He was a motorcycle enthusiast. And he was very confident in himself. He had a brother, Sean, who was just the opposite. Sean was more reserved, and he loved books, and he loved studying and learning. And they were polar opposites, but yet this was a very loving, happy family. Now, to share this story, and this is a little different message for me, so bear with me. To share this story, I have to start with another person that Peggy and Mike told me about. His name is Larry Hancock. So Larry Hancock, when he was a child, he suffered from rheumatic fever, and the virus attacked his heart and weakened his heart, and it would plague him throughout his whole life. But despite that, he still met and married the love of his life, and they had a son, and he put together a career in exterior trades and did well for himself. But as life went on, as it does, affliction starts to happen, and his heart began to weaken. And it stopped him from working, it stopped his career, it stopped his way of life. And he had to undergo two major operations on his heart. And the operations were successful. It got him back up and running. It got him back on track in his life. And things would be good for a while. And then on April 5th, 2010, at 6 a.m., a very early morning, it was cold and snowy, and Larry got up to go outside to start the vehicle for his wife. His wife heard the door open, but she never heard it close. So she went to check on Larry, and she found him lying unresponsive on the ground. Larry had never made it to the vehicle. Larry woke up in the hospital, and this would be the last time that Larry would see the outside of that hospital with the same heart he went into the hospital with. Larry was on a heart transplant list, and he was out of time. He needed a heart. But Larry's a person of faith. So as he sat there in the hospital and struggled with this affliction, I've had conversations with Larry. He leaned into a couple of scriptures that he held on to, that he was passionate about, and that through his affliction, he said they brought him encouragement and comfort. And though he had perspective that I hope that we never have to see, he was okay. He felt that this relationship he had with God, that although we all have affliction, it was encouraging and comforting to him. Well, on April 17th of 2010, it was thunder over Louisville. And tragedy would strike Mike and Peggy Lyons life and their children's life when Patrick would have a motorcycle accident that unfortunately was fatal. He was an organ donor, and as you can imagine, time is of the essence, and the medical team went to work immediately to harvest the organs and get them to the recipients as quickly as possible. And Larry Hancock received his heart on April 17th from Patrick. Now, as you can imagine, as Louisville is celebrating with an air show and fireworks, a family now, in a matter of minutes, as Rusty spoke about, their identity has changed forever. And it must have been surreal because it happened so fast. And then on the other side of town, you have Larry Hancock with his family praying that this heart transplant work. And it did work. And Larry would go on to recover. It was a long recovery. This is not a couple of weeks. This takes time. It takes a lot of time. But Larry was true to his faith, and he pushed in with these scriptures that brought him encouragement and comfort. And I spoke to Larry, and I asked him, I said, Larry, what was going through your mind? What was it like at that time? And he said, well, you have a different perspective. Life changes. You see things differently. And he said, I had 3 things in my life that I wanted to make priority because things had shifted. He said, number 1, I wanted to spend more time with my son. Number 2, I wanted to spend time taking care of my wife as she had taken care of me. But number 3 is the one that surprised me. If Larry would have told me, I want to spend more time traveling, I want to spend more time reading books that I love in certain geographical locations to see a sunset here or see a sunrise there, or I'd spend more time fishing, we would have all understood. We would have smiled and nodded our head. But that's not what Larry said. Larry said that he was so humbled by the experience and this encouragement and comfort that God had given him that he wanted to spend his life that he was given, this extra time, he wanted to spend this time in helping other people with this same encouragement, comfort that God had given to him. So he did. He started really participating in his church. He started teaching Sunday school. And he did this for a couple years. So he got better at teaching, got better at speaking. And a pastor told him, said, Larry, you know what? You would be an amazing pastor. You have such a servant heart. Because Larry wasn't preaching condemnation, and he wasn't preaching judgment. He was preaching love and encouragement, this thing that he had been given. And he was sharing it with others. So this sounded great to Larry, the opportunity to do more of what he had been blessed with. So he went to seminary. But now I got to back up a little bit because he had sent message through his medical contacts in the medical community that he wanted to meet the family of the donor of the heart that he received. So Mike and Peggy Lyons on the other side, they received this message and they wanted to meet him. They wanted, I guess, to see what this man was going to do, or this person at that time, what they didn't know who he was, what he was going to do with this time that had been gifted to him through the heart of their son. So it was arranged, and they met. And of course, Larry, this loving person, and they got to know him, they stayed connected. So it's this amazing, inspirational story. It was featured on the local news. So they stayed in contact, and Larry completes seminary, and then he is given a church, a landmark Assembly of God church in Greenfield, Kentucky. It's about 2.5 hours from here, and it's in western Kentucky. And on his maiden voyage, on the very day he is to be announced and he is to take the pulpit, Mike and Peggy Lyons wants to go be a part of that. So, on this day, when he's at the front of the church receiving everybody in and greeting people, they make the journey, and Mike and Peggy Lyons pull into the parking lot. And then Peggy starts saying, this is where the story gets really interesting. Peggy starts saying she starts feeling something. Something starts happening that she can't explain. But as she's looking at this church and she sees Larry, things start to kind of shift and change around in her. And as her and Mike get out of the vehicle and they start moving towards the church, and they're greeted and received by now Pastor Larry Hancock, she says this feeling starts to get more and more. That's just the way she describes it. But as they get into the service and they're surrounded by the people, and Larry starts speaking in this way of encouraging and comforting, Peggy is a very great communicator. She's a teacher. She speaks multiple languages. She communicates in a literal way. She doesn't color, and she's not verbose. She doesn't color the conversation or frame it up to present it in a certain light. She just speaks in a very literal sense. And this is what she said to me as I sat in her and Mike's living room, and she told me this. She said, Chris, I'm not a religious person. I have never been a religious person. Now, when my children were little, Patrick and Sean, we took them to the Catholic Church, but I did not necessarily subscribe to religion. She says, but I'm telling you, as I sat in that church with those people surrounding me, and Pastor Larry Hancock began to speak, she goes, I felt faith. I don't know how else to explain it. I felt the faith. I felt it. And it was changing. It was this comforting and this encouragement that I felt through that environment and through what had happened. And it was profound for Peggy. It would change her life. It would change her opinion. It would change her views. That even though she was in this affliction, she was comforted and encouraged. Now, they left, life goes on, and I wish I could say that was the end of tragedy coming to their house, but it was not. Because Sean came home in a condition that no parent wants to see their child coming home in. Sean came home in the final stages of AIDS. And the disease, of course, was not kind. He was on oxygen, his heart was failing, his organs was failing. But I guess he'd heard his mother talk about this landmark Assembly of God church and this Larry Hancock that had the heart of his brother. And he had one final request. He says, I would like to make this journey, and I would like to take part of this church, and I want to talk to Larry Hancock. I want to talk to the man that has the heart of my brother. So Mike and Peggy and Sean make the journey down to the church to Larry Hancock and visit him. And of course, Larry is how he is. He's very, very loving, very encouraging, very comforting, and just embraced him. And they had a nice long conversation. And I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what they talked about. I felt that it would have been rude for me to even ask. I felt like this was a private moment between Sean and Larry, and that it was important, and I needed to be respectful of that. So I didn't ask anything about it. But Larry did volunteer this. He said that after they got done talking, he had confided in him. Once he got home, he was going to go into hospice care. And he did. As soon as he got home, he told his parents, I'm ready to go in hospice care. And the following Sunday, after he spoke to Pastor Larry Hancock, Sean passed away. That's a lot of suffering. That's a lot of affliction. That's a lot of identity change, as Rusty spoke of last week. Right? But I spoke to Michael Lyons. We had a talk, and I said, do you feel like in that situation of what happened, do you feel like Sean was comforted and was at peace and was ready to go on with God? And he said, absolutely he was. Absolutely, I believe that. He was at peace and he was ready. That even through this their affliction, this comfort and this encouragement. In Luke chapter 8, verses 11 through 15, we recently in the church had a group study, a deep dive of this scripture, and it is where Jesus explains and describes where God is the sower, and he plants Jesus, the word, the seed, in the earth. And Jesus speaks of how we are to receive him, and he speaks of the different ways that you can receive him and not be fruitful. But there is one way that he says that you receive him, and basically his commandment, his word, his logos, he is logos, and receive him. And he says it's into your heart. That he says the good ground, the good soil is a good heart that's made itself ready. And then he uses this verbiage of through steadfastness, patience, and endurance, that you would bear fruit with patience. What kind of fruit? The same kind of fruit Jesus bore. But he uses this word heart. That's nearly 2,000 years ago, and language changes, words change, they become different things, and they have different meaning. So I think it's really important in context to understand how Jesus presented, how we receive this word into our heart. In Koine Greek, the original definition for this word I've got on the screen, cardia, is a physical heart. Now, in spiritual context, as Jesus is presenting it, it means this. It means your essence. It means your core. It means your moral compass. It means your mind. It means how you choose. It is how you choose. It is you. It is your essence. It is who you are. It is defined as how you choose. That is your heart. What's glaringly missing in the definition is the word emotions. In this word cardia, emotions are not covered in the scope of the definition. That's a whole different word. Actually, in this, Jesus warned in 8:13 about receiving his word into an emotional place and that you would fall away, that you would have to do it and bring him into your center of who you are in your cardia. I mean, if you don't get nothing else from me in this message, even if you don't subscribe to the Bible or Jesus, hear this, that anybody who uses their emotions as a compass will always find themselves in a very terrible place. They will always go from problem to problem to problem, and they always will be this person that in reflection says, how come this keeps happening to me? How come I keep having these bad things in my life? And that's because emotions are never meant to be your compass. They are meant to be your gauges of just how you feel. And anybody who chooses to use the compass or the emotions as their compass will always end in problems because emotions, they want immediate gratification. And Jesus is talking about this journey that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we mature in this, in his word, his commandment. With understanding, we bear fruit with patience. Though it's from a different place, and it actually kind of makes it sound like that our emotions at times are pitted against our cardia. That's kind of why they fasted, I believe. Because it lets you know where everything was set up. You quickly become aware of where your emotions are. If I was to churchy way of saying it, I would say the flesh. That we struggle with the flesh. Well, it's your emotions. So what is this word that Jesus is talking about? Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37 is an extremely famous parable. It's called the Good Samaritan. I'm not going to read it and go through it, but I am going to explain it. And this is going to take a few minutes to unpackage. So Jesus was out and about doing what he normally did. And it says that a lawyer, and a lawyer back then would be of Mosaic law because there was no separation between church and state. It was all of the same. Even though they were under Roman occupation, they still were allowed to live within their law. So it says that a lawyer stood up and he meant to put Jesus to the test. And he said, "Teacher, how do I inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said this, "How do you read it?" So it's a manual. It's God with us. He knows that it's a lawyer, and he knows that he knows. So he asked him, "How do you read it?" And the lawyer responds with this. He says, "To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself." And Jesus simply says, "You're right. Do this and you'll live." And he says, "Okay," meaning to justify everything he just went through. He wanted to get more of a response from Jesus. He said, "And who is my neighbor?" Who is my neighbor? So what was the original question? How must I inherit eternal life? We understand love the Lord your God with all your heart, but it came down to love thy neighbor as thyself. How do I do that? Who's my neighbor? So I don't know if he was trying to get Jesus into a discussion or maybe even a debate. I don't know, but Jesus goes all Messiah on him. And Jesus just goes right into the parable. And he says there was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and robbers descended on him. They beat him mercilessly. They stripped him of his clothes. Clothes were very valuable back then. They weren't prevalent like they are today. And they took all of his possessions, his money, and they left him for dead. They thought they killed him. and went on their way. And then he says, along came a priest. I want you to totally get the understanding of this complete parable, and it's usually taught in part. I'm going to give you the whole thing. So I'm going to step out of the parable for just a second to let you know what priest meant in context back then, what Jesus is actually saying. Today we think of priest, and we get it from the church and different places that you just volunteer to become a priest and you feel called into the priesthood. There's a lot of different ways you can become a priest. This was not the case in antiquity. Back then at this time, I'll give you the three. We hear about the tabernacle, we hear about the temple, and then we hear about the synagogues. Well, the synagogues did not have any priest. It was not the house of God. It was kind of like this. It was a place of learning, and it was a rabbi, a master of the law and teachings would just teach and encourage and get you on your path. That's what it was. But a priest was not there. A priest would have been in the tabernacle, which is in one place. It was started by Moses, and Aaron was the first high priest. Now it eventually became when David had a vision to make it grander. Solomon, his son, built the temple, and it was Solomon's temple. It's the home of the Ark of the Covenant. But to be a priest there was extraordinarily exclusive because you had to be the third tribe of Israel, which was the Levites. So a Levite could not own anything. They could not own land. They couldn't make a living for themselves, and they couldn't grow food for themselves. They had one job. They worked at the temple. That was their job. So it was a 3-tier of priesthood. The first tier was simply the servants that took care of it. They would have been the musicians. They would have been the singers. They would have been the people that cut the grass. You couldn't be there and work there. It wasn't a volunteer thing. You had to be born into it. You had to be a Levite. Now, the next tier was the Levite priest, because you had to be a Levite to be at the temple. So in order to be a priest, you had to be a Levite. Now, what these priests did is that if you sinned or did something wrong back then, you would go to the temple to give a sacrifice, and it would require a Levite priest to give the sacrifice to God on your behalf. They were like the go-between. And then a high priest ran the whole thing, the whole temple. They were in charge, and they gave one real sacrifice a year officially, and that was the atonement or Yom Kippur. That was their job. That is the priesthood. You had to be a Levite. It is by birth. It is by birth. Okay? So now, back into it, we got a man laying on the side of the ditch that the thieves beat and left for dead, and he says, here comes a priest. Well, he's talking about a Levite priest on the other side of the road. The Levite priest didn't stop. He kept going. And then it says, then came a Levite. Well, surely the servant of the temple would stop and help the man dying on the side of the road. But he didn't. He said he looked and kept going. But then Jesus chooses a Samaritan. And he says the Samaritan saw the man, had compassion for him, went and bandaged his wounds, put wine and vinegar on them, put him on his own animal, took him to an inn, paid for them to keep him and help him, and said, I have to go, but when I return, I will pay you whatever I owe you. Just take care of them. And then Jesus says to the lawyer, from the position of the man dying on the side of the road looking up, who would he say is his neighbor? And the lawyer said, the man that did good. He says, you are right. Do the same. But now you have to understand who a Samaritan was. See, a nice way to put it is at that time, the Hebrew people, they didn't play well with others. They didn't like other people. They were forced into this situation because they were under occupation of Rome. They had no choice. And Samaria was basically half Jewish, which was a problem because now, how they viewed it, you see how they were with bloodlines, and now you have the Levites, that is the priest and the priesthood. They were the religious. And now Jesus is using a Samaritan. This dog, this trash, is the one that's doing good. It is said in antiquity in that time that a good Hebrew would rather trudge through the Jordan River and cross in the water than go through Samaria and be around this trash. So why would Jesus pick somebody for this parable that, just to bring it up in context, against a Levite would have been more than just a faux pas? Because had the man on the side of the road not been beaten and been able to continue on his journey, and the Samaritan coming another way, and they would have passed one another, the Samaritan would have understood not to look or talk to the Hebrew. And the Hebrew man that would have looked down on this trash. Yet it's the Samaritan that didn't judge, that gave based on need versus deserve. Because if I put myself in the place of the Samaritan, I'm thinking, yeah, you don't deserve it. You can lay there. You got what you got, right? But he didn't. Of his own resources, he gave. Now, that is the almost complete understanding of the story. And the church, for the most part, understands everything I just said. But now let me dive a deeper bit into what Jesus said, because there's a glaring piece of this that I've never heard talked about, but we're missing. So the robbers are self-centric, they're selfish, and they live a life unrestrained. They are an unrestrained. What does that mean? They don't think of anyone but themselves. They don't care about anyone but themselves. It's whatever I want, whatever I need, whatever happens. I will beat people for it. I will hurt people for it. I live life unrestrained. And now over here, we have people that are self-centric. They're selfish. However, they live in a life restrained. They're living a restrained life. They don't just go and beat people. They just don't go and hurt people. They're in restraint. So the world would say that is good. So we know that hurting other people and doing this over there is bad. So by default, if you're not bad, then you're good. And what the church sees it the same way too. The church likes to say not doing bad is, we like to call it sin. So we're not sinning. We're not doing things we shouldn't do. We're not hurting other people. So therefore, we're good. And it gets taught like that. But Jesus says, no. You're wrong. There's not two. There's three. There's three options here. See, yes, the robbers are bad. Absolutely. They're self-centric, they're selfish, and they live unrestrained. They do whatever they want. Over here, you have somebody that is self-centric, selfish, but live in restraint. They don't sin. Do you think that the Levites, these righteous, holy, religious people, would have beat that man on the side of the road and done that? No. Would they have stole from him? That's a sin. They would never do that. They would never do that. They were in restraint, like most of the church, living a life restrained. I'm not sinning. And Jesus says, the third option is this over here. In the moments when he had opportunity to choose and do good, was he self-centric? No. What was centric in his life? The person on the side of the road. Was he selfish? No. He was selfless. I mean, the equivalent was he put him into his own vehicle, drove him to the hospital, and said, I'll pay the bill. Just take care of this person that actually don't like me, but just take care of them. And Jesus said, that's good. That is good. It's not three. Paul says in Ephesians 4:24, he sums it up nicely. He says, let the thief steal no more. In other words, come out of an unrestrained life and work with your hands and make your own resources, your own money. Now we're in a life of restraint. We're not hurting anybody, but we're not doing good for anybody either except ourselves. And then Paul says the strangest thing. He says, for the reason of, or so that you can give to others when they have need. He's repeating what Jesus was saying, that it's three things, not two. It's not good or bad. It's hot, cold, and lukewarm. See, this scripture that's used of love thy neighbor as thyself, it comes from Leviticus 19:18. It's from the Pentateuch. What's that mean? It's from Mosaic law. It's Leviticus. What's Leviticus? As in the Levites. It is the temple. It is their book. To love thy neighbor as thyself. How they were defining it, though, was living in a life of restraint and being religious. Keep in mind, these are the same people that Jesus called out being a den of thieves. Keep in mind, these are the same people that Jesus said, your father is Satan. These people that was living in restraint. These people that was condemning other people for their sins and telling them they needed to be like us, speaking down to them. Those people. Jesus said, don't be like those people. Do good. In Galatians 5:14, Paul says this, the whole law, all of it, is fulfilled in this one commandment. You can take the rest of the law and set it to the side and take this one commandment and you'll fulfill it all. And what is it? Love thy neighbor as thyself. Like Jesus said to do it, to be the good neighbor. Selfless, not selfish. Not in a life of restraint, of just simply trying not to sin and not hurt others, being in restraint, but be a doer of the word. Do good like Jesus said. I've known about Leviticus, and I've known about this commandment, and I know Jesus said, yeah, eternal life hangs on this commandment. And I know Paul said the whole thing hangs on this thing. So I've always been a little confused when Jesus gets done with his ministry. And he's at Passover. He's literally hours away from being taken into custody, beaten, and then crucified. And he waits until then to give his commandment. And what he does is he's sitting there with his inner circle. He tells Judas, go do what you're going to do and do it quickly. He's effectively ordering his own crucifixion. It's time. It's time. And then those who are left, he says, now here's my commandment. That you love one another as I have loved you. That you love one another. By this, the whole world will know that you're my disciple. And I've heard that, and I was like, how does that connect to Leviticus 19:18? Love thy neighbor as thyself. And I kind of wrestled with this. And then I found this little verse in Acts 10:38. And it's a simple little verse. However, it is meant to be a culmination, a total scope of how you define what Jesus did day in, day out, every day. If just one little sentence, how would you define Jesus' life? And it says this, Jesus went about doing good. Good like the Good Samaritan. Jesus was giving based on need, not deserve. If Jesus would have healed people and comforted people and fed people as he did based on deserve, nobody gets healed, nobody gets fed, because the truth is, none of us deserve it. That's what Jesus, his life was. And he didn't judge. You can't find anywhere in the Bible that anyone came to Jesus needing encouragement and comfort in affliction that Jesus ever said, get the sin out of your life and I'll help you. Quit sinning and become like me, and then I'll take care of you. Then I'll feed you. That wasn't Jesus. Jesus didn't condemn and he didn't condone. The only people he ever condemned was that religious crowd, like the Levites. The ones that was so judgmental. The ones that demanded that you become like them in order to get to God. You hear what I'm saying? Go about doing good. So, listen to me. Mike and Peggy Lyons, through the heart of their son, was introduced to the heart of God's son. And they were encouraged and they were comforted because one man chose to do what was right and to do good and to be like Christ when given the opportunity. He chose. He chose. It wasn't an emotional thing. He chose. We got to get out of the idea that we're waiting for a certain feeling before we do good, or we're waiting for the church to go out and them do good. And we got to get out of this idea that, yes, I need to get into refrain from sin and I got to behave a certain way like the church. And I need to become like them. No, 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 no. We need to become like Christ, and we need to go about doing good when given the opportunity and fulfill the commandment of Christ in our life, because that's what it's all about. See, that's what Pastor Larry Hancock did. And then when I met with Mike and Peggy Lyons, and instead of me comforting them, they ended up comforting me. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm going to start winding down here, but I do want to read to you 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 4. Then I'll give you my final thoughts and we'll conclude. It says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves were comforted by God." Listen, guys, the church global, the church local, that means you, that means me, we need a heart transplant. We need to take on the heart of Christ into our cardia. And we need to choose to become the good neighbor. We need to become like Christ. Right now, and this wasn't arranged, it just happened this way, but Landmark Church is having their homecoming. And I'm sure right now, Pastor Larry Hancock is speaking, and it's encouraging and comforting, I'm sure. And Mike and Peggy Lyons is there with him now. Isn't that amazing? And right now, I am speaking to you because Mike and Peggy Lyons, through their affliction, comforted me. And now, hopefully, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm encouraging and comforting you. And you need to be like them. I need to be like them. And this is how I'm going to leave it with you, is Peggy said this. And I think, man, what a statement. She said that Larry Hancock is a disciple of Christ because he acts like Christ, because he's comforting, encouraging. And I think if Jesus was here, he would tell us, now go and do the same. Get busy encouraging and comforting and loving. Quit condemning. Quit judging. Quit being religious and start being Christ-like. Guys, we got to choose. We have to choose. It's not a feeling. It's a choosing. Jesus rolled up his sleeves and he got busy. We get distracted really easy, but I think we need to all prioritize like Pastor Larry Hancock prioritized.